Hello, I'm Paulo Rocco, and you're listening to Reprint, brought to you by the Temple News, your in-depth look into the stories you need to know about. This week, I speak to news editors Evelyn and Nurbanu Sahin about this past year's student-led activism and awareness for Israel and Palestine. Then I speak to features editor Bayleh Alexander about Temple's admission of 42 students from the Carver High School of Engineering and Science. You guys did a really in-depth timeline of the events happening at Temple from October 7th of last year to now, specifically talking about activism around the Israel-Hamas conflict. Why did you guys decide to write this piece?
Honestly, it was, obviously the 1-year anniversary, October 7th, marked a year of the stuff going on abroad and obviously stuff going on at campus. We have had a lot of coverage in the past 2 weeks regarding protests on campus, especially with Temple's Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. So that was kind of the main thing, honestly. We just wanted to just do an overlook on what's been happening on campus and also what's been happening abroad.
For sure. I mean, what have kind of been the standout events over this last year that have really impacted this and, blown this whole thing up, really?
I think for the most part, it would definitely be all of the events that Hillel has held, as well as any kind of the big, huge rallies. So there was the first standout kind of event in my mind was the SJP rally that happened on April 25th. That one, Temple's SJP met on campus and then walked to City Hall, and I believe a group of individuals also went over to the University of Pennsylvania. So that's when the first lawn encampment started at the University of Pennsylvania. Coverage on that we didn't really cover until later in the summer when multiple individuals were arrested, and at least one Temple student was arrested in connection with two encampments, actually, one attempted encampment. So I think our coverage really kind of picked up once we saw everything happening with the encampment, once we started seeing responses from both sides to talk about the hostage situation, and just kind of bringing awareness to everything. And I think the increasing, the university response was mostly what prompted a lot of the calls to action from SJP and Hillel.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I've been following this since October 7th. Some of my pictures are featured in this timeline in some of the articles. I was at the vigil that Hillel held at the Bell Tower, the die-in by SJP in front of Charles, the sit-in at the SAC, so on and so forth. I felt like, for the most part, obviously there's discourse at all these events from both sides, and people tend to argue at these. But for the most part, they've been very peaceful. And this, recent event at the engineering career fair, where students were arrested, and then subsequently SJP was removed from campus, seemed like it just, I don't know how to describe it. It just came out of nowhere. Would you guys agree with that sentiment, or do you think this has built up to this point? Tensions have built up to this point?
I think it's built up. I think it's boiled over, especially for a lot of SJP. SJP's gotten very, the university response with SJP, they haven't been able to meet with them. Mm-hmm. They haven't had, an open forum the way that they've been able to in the past. And obviously, it's a very sensitive subject, especially to talk about the career fair and everything. But I think it's a culmination of a lot of things. I think it's a culmination of university response. It's a culmination of SJP continuing to pressure the university time after time, and still kind of know they're not getting the response that they want. Do you have anything?
I think tensions definitely built up on both sides, for sure. I mean, we've noticed, the guidelines were updated by the university over the summer. They're handling probably more than, a lot of student code of conduct meetings. We know some of the encampments one finished out, but now there's some from that Charles and Hillel rally that happened. But then also at the same time, SJP is pressuring because they feel like they're being targeted. There's a lot of things. I think it's not just, unfortunately, on Temple's campus. A lot. College activism has definitely seen an increase, and there's been multiple universities that have taken pretty, I think, strict actions against student orgs. And, for us, obviously, that erupted into what happened at the career fair, unfortunately. Now we're seeing lawsuits getting pursued by different organizations. The police department is, getting a few, I hate to use popular references, but side eyes, but basically, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to that point, why has this, discourse in the United States specifically played out on college campuses almost exclusively or, predominantly?
Honestly, from the history perspective, we're just seeing a rise of what happened, in the 80s with South African apartheid. It's just basically people are seeing what has worked in history, and people are, remodeling their protests after that. That's, what the encampments were, asking universities to divest, camping out on the lawns. That worked previously. And in some cases it didn't work out, obviously, especially we've seen the Penn encampment. But
I also think activism in the young adult community and everything like that, we're so we see everything online. We're seeing so much content coming in, especially in the Middle East, and being able to have kind of a firsthand glimpse of the atrocities that are going on in Gaza. It's incredibly probably harrowing for a lot of people, and that's why they feel so invested in it, because we have so much access to all of this information. So I think we're begging people who aren't, the older generations might not be online as much as we are, or something like that, everything. Just to be able to see this, we want to show people this is what we're seeing, and it seems like you all aren't doing anything about it. I think that's what a lot of young activists are feeling these days.
Sorry to cut you off, but I think a lot of it also, I know SJP has said this previously in their rallies, but a lot of them have families over there. They are Palestinians, or they have family that originated in the area. So for some people, it's a personal issue. They're seeing the stuff. It's the most televised event, I think, or the most media centered conflict to go on. So for some people, it's very personal. It's home.
This timeline is going to continue, obviously. As you mentioned, we have potential lawsuits that are at play, students that have been charged with some crimes. Where do you guys see this going from here on out?
I see more protests. I see more student activism coming out, not just from SJP, but multiple different student groups. I know they formed a group, SJP, with 5 other universities in the Philadelphia area. There's going to be more protests. This is not something that's going to end. As long as the conflict goes on, people are going to fight for it. The university, my personal opinion, obviously, I think the strict actions are going to continue. Currently SJP is under interim suspension, and they're having an investigation. The timeline, even if we hope, everything ends, it's going to continue. It's not something that's going to go away very fast.
I agree completely with everything. And I think, especially with, it seems, obviously working on suspicion, SJP seems to want to be back on campus. They want to continue to show their activism on Temple's campus and everything like that. Obviously, if they're placed on suspension, they can't hold any events. They can't have any rallies or anything like that. It would be that would be a violation of the student code of conduct. But I think it's just going to be a constant work in progress to get people to talk to each other, and communication between all parties, just to get a point across, and especially kind of seeing what's going on, and we'll report on it.
Well, do you guys have anything else you'd like to say on this?
I think the whole thing was a labor of love, how we've covered, since October 7th, President Engler put out some statements right after October 7th, and then we started to cover, rally after rally after rally and event after event after event. And, it's been incredible how student journalism has kind of played out across the country. I got to talk to some other student journalists from, say, the University of Michigan that are, they're seeing a lot of this on their campus, and it's so inspirational to have this kind of collaboration and how tough it is to cover this in an election year.
Yeah.
Cover this, as unbiased as possible. Try to, get as much information as you can. Being a young person myself, it's just, I think it's a crazy time we live in. But I think, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Perfectly said,
Yeah,
honestly.
Sorry, don't want to
No,
get
that
too
was
sentimental.
perfect.
But I love seeing other people care about what they care about, and
Yeah.
that's Sorry.
I think this is something that we're always gonna be on top of. It's something that we've grown to put in our routine, constantly checking. 100%.
It's day to day. Yeah.
It is day to day, and it's day to day over there, and it makes sense that it's day to day over here. And it's good to see people fight for what they believe, regardless of it's not just this protest guideline stuff. They don't just impact SJP. It is every single protest that will follow. It is even unions on campus. So it's interesting to see how it will play out, how the university will continue to tackle it. I think the attorney I spoke to from the ACLU said the same thing. They're fighting for the right for everyone to protest, not just one organization.
Right.
So it's interesting for us to see how it plays out. But I enjoy it. And I hope that we get to see more stuff come out of it.
Now I speak to features editor Bayleh Alexander about Temple's admission of 42 students from the Carver High School of Engineering and Science. You wrote a piece for this week's print edition. Big week for features with the community issue. I mean, how was that going through it?
It was honestly kind of nice. I really liked the community issue because I feel like it was broad enough that we could really do a service for the community. And really highlight what's being done that a lot of people might not know about. So I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of work, but I think it came out really well. It was worth it.
Yeah, for sure. Totally agree with that. Speaking of doing something for the community, Temple announced a new initiative to accept 42 students from Carver High School, which is located on Norris and 16th Street.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about this initiative.
Yeah, so the Department of Public Safety's engagement unit kind of started this initiative to recruit more students from North Philly, specifically Carver High School within our patrol zone. They used Officer Wimberly as their mentor for this. He's kind of goes to the school and works on these initiatives. He does a greenhouse with them and really mentors these students and lets them know that Temple is an option to go to. And 20% of Carver's graduating class went to Temple this year as new freshmen,
Wow.
which I think is a large number.
It's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I found it interesting that this initiative is coming from the Department of Public Safety. How did that come about? And I mean, what is that relationship? How important is that relationship between the Department of Public Safety and the community?
Yeah, so I thought the same thing when I first heard about this. I was what does safety have to do with this? But it really is just about community engagement and having that connection between Temple and Carver, and having Officer Wimberly was people usually we have a bad rep as police officers, and I'm here to let them know that I'm not just a police officer, but I'm also your friend and your pal and a mentor. Yeah. And it really is just meant to bridge the gap between locals and students. We also released another story on this print. Those tensions are increasing, and so this was kind of just to help mend that gap and keep North Philly students local.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned the article, another initiative, the Cecil B. Moore, what was it?
The Cecil B. Moore Scholarship.
Yeah.
So this is kind of where we ran into some of the plot holes within this initiative.
Right.
One being that the students that go to Carver aren't necessarily North Philly students. They're from all over the place. So in an effort to recruit North Philly students, we're actually recruiting students from all over Philly. So it kind of it gets a little wishy-washy there. And then the Cecil B. Morris Scholars Program is for eligible students in like 8 zip codes around North
Right.
Central. So that is more central to North Philly. But even like then it kind of flip-flops, and one of the students who went to Carver was like 1 number off on the zip code and couldn't get the scholarship.
Right.
And so that was frustrating. And then it comes good again, and he got good financial aid. So there are like, I think this article kind of discussed like what good Temple is doing, and their community outreach is improving, but there is still work to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and to that point, I mean, what more do you think could be done? I know you talked to one student, as you just mentioned, that kind of told about his experience, but I mean, what more could be done, you think?
I think Temple's scholarships for North Central students really should be including room and board as well.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to integrate students from the community onto campus and you're not paying for the room and board, they're just going to continue living at home. And I think it's a really cool opportunity to get these kids fully engaged on campus and like that campus living and giving them a new environment. And that's something the student talked about as well. He was like, I didn't even honestly want to go to Temple at first because I wanted to go like outside of Philly and experience living somewhere else. I got my scholarship to Temple and now I go here, but it would be really nice if like room and board was also included so that I could like fully immerse myself here.
Right, for sure. And another point too that I think of like recruiting a diverse, background of people from the North Philly area to go to Temple is that CHS is like incredibly selective. I mean,
Yes.
tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a little bit in our research, I was like, okay, is this like a public school, private school? What's going on here? So Carver is a public magnet school, so it's public technically, but it's application only. And we found out they receive 2,000 applications every year and you have to apply to middle school and to high school. And I read this article about this student who was accepted into one of the 60 slots. Or it was like, I think it was 60 slots for the middle school. And then when he applied to high school, he didn't get in and he got waitlisted.
Right.
So like you're going to the school and like you have to keep applying and it's very selective. And at the end of the day, like these students, they have all A's and B's, perfect attendance, recommendation letters. Like it is likely they would have reached Temple standards to gain admission anyways, regardless of Temple's outreach. So when I researched a little bit more about that, I was like, these students would be getting in anyways. Like, what is this initiative even for?
Right.
And Officer Wimberly reemphasized when I asked him that even though these students are like academically capable of reaching Temple, a lot of them need the extra guidance and mentored support from like a mental standpoint to like even gain the motivation to go to college. But yeah, the school is incredibly selective and
So
has so many resources.
even being like an engineering kind of school already, there still are students, and it sounds like a lot of the students don't have college as like one of their priorities coming out of high school still.
Yeah, that is something that is still one of my unanswered ish because I asked the student that went to Carver, I was like, what is morale like at the high school? Like, what do people want to do after college?
Yeah.
And he's like, I mean, like, I find that like me and most of my friends like wanted to go to college, but the thing about Carver is that their initial mission when I think they opened like 40 years ago was to give this high level of education for underrepresented communities. And I think like 61% of their students are low income. So even with all the resources in the world and like you're academically very intelligent, there are extenuating circumstances that may be preventing them, like family issues or like home life. So that's really where Temple and their guidance have stepped in, is to be like, no guys, like you have these resources, you're on the right track, like let's push through, like let's finish up here and let's get a degree.
Gotcha. See, that makes a lot more sense now, seeing how this initiative works and how, I mean, it is helpful. But yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with the student. I think there is still a lot more conversation to be had then in that sense of, encouraging students that you can make it through college and be financially fine and all that, to actually give some support on the financial side, because I mean, getting in is just half the battle.
Exactly.
Really,
and like they can get in.
Yeah.
Like, and they're very intelligent students, and they like I think Temple's admission requirements are even less selective than
Right.
to get into Carver. So it's not even that at this point.
Yeah.
Like, I literally looked at the acceptance rates and I was like, woof.
I don't even know if I could get into Carver.
No,
at this point.
I really couldn't, honestly. These students are really intelligent. So it really is like, and Temple really just started this because I asked the student, I was like, what do you remember from high school? He graduated in 2022, I think.
Mhm.
What do you remember about Temple coming, guiding, mentoring? And he goes, I never saw him there. So this is something like super new that Temple, like, it's good that they're starting, and like I'll give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
But there just needs to be a little bit more development moving forward.
Thank you to our editors Evelyn, Nurbanu, and Bayleh for joining me on this episode, and make sure to check out all their work on the Temple News website. I'm Pablo Rocco, podcast editor for the Temple News, and this is Reprint.